Nice to see everybody. I'm going to change the view so I can see all the faces. Hello, everyone. Yay. Yeah, so I want to first thank you all for being here. I also want to let you know that unfortunately I'm slightly overbooked today, so I'll go just until 12:30. I'm sorry, till 1:30, if that's okay. So not to 2 o'clock. I apologize for that. Um, yeah, so I wanted to first see if anybody had any questions from last week, for those who were here. Um, and then if not, then we can kind of keep going. So, okay, yeah, George.
Good afternoon. Um, I'm afraid I had to leave early last week, but the question on my mind was one of lineage, both spiritual, the clear light, as well as genetic. And specifically, you were using, I think, a text by the ninth Karmapa,
Mm-hmm.
which had been commented on by Bokhar Rinpoche.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, but before all them was Talopa.
Mm-hmm.
And my question has to do with, I think there may be 3 or so major volumes that the ninth Karmapa wrote. Is that about right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah.
And then maybe how is Bokhar Rinpoche uh, uh,
How was he?
Talopa?
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, George. I appreciate the question. Yeah, so I think what we could say is Tilopa is considered to be one of Mahamudra is an interesting thing. There's not necessarily one individual human kind of progenitor of the practice, but Tilopa was one of the major ones. Um, there's a really great really great. I don't know if you're into academics. It's really good. This study of the life of Tilopa by this Italian scholar Fabrizio Torricelli, um, and uh, so it goes a little bit into his details. There's not a lot is necessarily known specifically about Tilopa, and there are two kind of major differences in kind of point of orientation. One is Tilopa was the single source of a lot of Mahamudra. It's kind of like very naturally realized, kind of being kind of like in the Dzogchen tradition we find with Garb Dorje. This kind of Garb Dorje was born, in a lake of milk, on a lotus blossom, kind of thing, miraculously, just like me. And Tilopa was, as best we know, perhaps from West Bengal, and at one point worked as a cowherd, and then later ended up pounding sesame seed, to be made into oil, that was used by courtesans. Um, I can't see the comments. Now, and thank you for your question, Ekta. I'll get to that too. So, Tilopa being Naropa's primary teacher, or what his primary kind of tantric teacher, is how this kind of Mahamudra instruction goes from Tilopa to Naropa, and then Marpa, Milarepa, Gempopa. Gempopa had a number of students, one of which was Karma Pakshi, the first Karmapa, and this is how this ended up, into the Karma Kagyu tradition. So ninth Karmapa composed 3 texts on Mahamudra. The largest one is called the Nidin Gyatso, or the Ocean of Certainty, or Ocean of Definitive Meaning. And I can put these headphones on, but do you have is it a phone you're working with? No. Okay. I'm a little
No.
limited in my movement.
No, it's okay. You trail off a little bit at the end of sentences. That's all.
Yeah. So yeah, and so Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And so the longest one is known as the Nedengatso, or the Ocean of Definitive Meaning. And then there's eliminating the darkness of ignorance, which is the second longest. And then there's the pointing out the Dharmakaya, which is the shortest, which I taught, I don't know, about a year and a half ago. These three texts it's kind of interesting. It's a little bit like an accordion. They weirdly, like, everything is contained even in the small, when in pointing out the Dharmakaya, it's everything from the Nedengatso is in there somehow. And then, you expand to make the Nedengatso, and everything from obviously the pointing out the Dharmakaya is in there and more. Now, Bokor Rinpoche was considered to be one of the greatest living Mahamudra masters, in contemporary times. And so he was the heart son of the previous Kala Rinpoche. And so he ended up being the major lineage holder of the Shangpa Kagyu. And then he was also considered the retreat master for the Karma Kagyu lineage as well. So he, back before the Karmapa controversy stuff started, he ran the 3-year retreat center at Rumtek Monastery, just behind Rumtek. I actually scaled the wall of that retreat center to be kind of close to this building because Bokor Rinpoche used to teach there. Let's see. And then he also facilitated, he was the retreat master for this monastery called Podang, a monastery called Lava, and his monastery had 2 3-year retreat centers. And then he would go down to South India to Mangod, where there was a very small Karma Kagyu monastery that he was affiliated with him. Let's see. I first came across Bokor Rinpoche in person in 1995 in Bodh Gaya. And then I became a close student of his through my root teacher, Ani Zangmo. Before she died, she wanted me to meet with him, and I started studying Mahamudra with him from 1997 until he died in 2004. And he had a very amazing kind of mastery of Mahamudra, and had been asked to write this very short text, Opening the Door to Certainty, by the retreatants at one of his 3-year retreats at his place in Mirik, which is just outside of Darjeeling. And I spent probably a combined 3 years or so, in Mirik studying with him. It was 3 years, spread out over about 7. But he's a very, very, very dear teacher of mine. So this is kind of the lineage progression. Now we find Mahamudra in all of the other Kagyu traditions. We find it in the Gelug tradition, although the practice of Mahamudra in the Gelug tradition is, for lack of a better term, a little bit more analytical. There is a I'll share it next week. I don't want to get off topic. And then there's Mahamudra in the Sakya lineage as well. There's Mahamudra in the Nyingma traditions as additionally. However, the Nyingma traditions tend to favor the practice of Dzogchen or Ati Yoga over Mahamudra, for lack of a better term. I mean, it's not 100% accurate, but it is not untrue. And so Ekta asks this question: what's the difference between Mahamudra and Dzogchen? And so this is interesting, and still being determined because the history is very kind of dicey. But so Mahamudra and Dzogchen are similar in that they're both non-conceptual forms of meditation. And sometimes the instructions are quite similar. In fact, the early Indian instructions, the kind that we find like with Tilopa's 6 nails and things of the sort, are very reminiscent of what we find in the Ati Yoga or Dzogchen tradition. Dzogchen comes up, more from Central Asia, this kind of Pakistan, Afghanistan area, and was said to have arisen from this being Garb Dorje. And through him and a series of his students, it was transmitted up to Tibet. In being transmitted to Tibet, it was first embraced and then fell into controversy. And a lot of this had to do with what's called the Hashang debate, this debate over sudden enlightenment versus gradual enlightenment. And Santarakshita was called in to come from India to kind of moderate, to debate on this argument around this progressive model of liberation rooted more in the classical Indian Buddhist tradition versus this kind of more Chan style fast sudden enlightenment thing. And so nobody actually even knows if this debate happened, but they say it did. And Shantarakshita won the debate, and Hashang, this Chan monk, was sent into exile. And so the state religion of Tibet became Buddhism, and it tended towards this kind of progressive cultivation of enlightenment. Now, interestingly enough, shortly thereafter, there was this Tibetan scholar / practitioner named Vairocana. Vairocana was, at first he was favored for bringing a lot of this Hatha Yoga stuff to Tibet, but then shortly after that, he fell out of favor and he was banished. And in some of the stories, he was like thrown into a pit full of lice, all these like kind of amazing things, right? But he was actually killed. So there's this kind of like brutal, controversy. It doesn't still go on so much, although I did bring this up to His Holiness the Psychic Treason once in an interview and asked him how much this stuff was still around, because the Sakyas really were quite mean to the Kajus around Mahamudra, because they were distrustful as well of this idea of sudden enlightenment. And he seemed very upset that I brought this question up, but I couldn't not. And he didn't really answer it either, which was funny. But Hatha Yoga and Mahamudra are quite similar. There's a difference though in tonality. Like Hatha Yoga, I think we could say, is a lot more direct. It's as if there's a presentation of resting into this fast severance of conceptuality and experiencing what's called the mind of clear light, very kind of suddenly, formlessly, directly. Whereas with Mahamudra, there's a little bit more of a gradual kind of like a sing-song kind of call and response between resting into stillness and insight. Like, this kind of nice, very, not necessarily progressive, but gentle. And I think while both of them are said to be enhanced by devotional practices, Mahamudra to me feels a little bit more kind of loving, devotional, like you're having a love affair with phenomena that's like slow and really steamy. Whereas Hatha Yoga is like, we're just getting married right now, and it's like a shotgun wedding, so to speak. Or maybe we're like, the like father-in-law or mother-in-law has a gun and forcing us to get married kind of thing, which is what a shotgun wedding really is. But so this is the thing. There's there's a speed piece. There's a suddenness like piece. But then also when you look at these early Indian texts, there is also the speed too. Saraha was an incredible, incredible, Mahamudra master, and said to be the, one of the human progenitors of the practice. And he was a very interesting person too, because it's said that he practiced the Hindu tradition during the day and Vajrayana tradition, at night, and he kind of really brought the two together very nicely through his presence. So anyway, I hopefully that was yeah, and then there's Sri Singha, exactly. Um, yeah, the Gillick approach was influenced and still is influenced by Madhyamaka. There's a really lovely Mahamudra text by the first Panchen Lama, which is quite nice. And there was a commentary by the Dalai Lama on that, which is nice. It's also a very elegant text, short, clear, etc. And yeah, so there's this guy David Jackson who wrote this book called Mind Seeing Mind, which is about the Geluk form of or approach to Mahamudra. And there's a really interesting podcast on the Wisdom podcast, an interview with him. And I don't mean to, so my lineage roots will show. I just found I was like, wow, that's a lot of words. No offense, but I really prefer this direct experience kind of thing to the philosophical point of orientation that you find as being more of the Geluk approach to Mahamudra. But that's also just a matter of preference, and in my case, a demonstration of all of my limitations. Because if I were actually worth anything, I would be able to connect to that. Yeah, Melissa.
Okay, my usual ratty self is that there is, I just don't want to give the wrong impression, because there is in Galupa teachers who teach about direct experience.
Mm-hmm.
So
oh yeah,
it's not always philosophical, and I know you know that, but I have this thing about lineage delineating too much between each other, just because as you teach, realization is realization.
absolutely. Yeah, no, totally. And when in 2012, Gyaltsen Rinpoche was giving the Kajinatso, so the transmission of all the tantras that Marpa had brought from India to Tibet, and I was there for that, and there was also this very kind of sneaky Geluk monk, and super sweet, and he became kind of like a lunch partner of mine, and it turned out that he was one of the contenders for the Gendon Tripa position. So he was super, I mean, it was basically he was just, and it's not that he was passed over. I think he had actually denied the position. He was offered to him, and he was like, no, I don't want it. So he, to be the leader of the Geluk tradition, and he was like, no, I'd rather, focus on my practice. So he and I ended up, sitting together at lunch and talking all this time, and I had actually found this out from this Kaju yogi who was there, and they're like, oh, he was almost the Ganden Tripa, so we're like, okay, let's make a list of transmissions we want to ask him to give at night, when Gyaltsen Rinpoche wasn't giving the empowerment, but he was so humble that he wouldn't do it. So super beautiful, humble, very realized, gentle being. So I have a photo of him, and I haven't seen him since 2012. I don't know where he is. I don't even know his name. But yeah. So yeah, the Geluk tradition is absolutely amazing as well. And though, these tonal differences are palpable, the same way accent is, right? We can't help the accent we might have, or the shape of our body, or these kinds of things. They just are what they are, and it doesn't mean it's not a good lineage or there's no wisdom, etc. Yeah, so I did want to kind of, just move to the next step of, Bokra Rinpoche's text, which is actually instruction on shamatha. But before I do want to share, my poor sons are always make fun of me because there seems to be like a new thing coming in the mail every day, and it's always for dad, and it's always a book. So this thing came. This is actually a couple weeks ago. But it's a very, very short little booklet called "Songs of Experience" by Trungpa Rinpoche, and it's really beautiful because these songs are there are only a handful of them in here, and they were written before before he left Tibet and went down to India. And so he has a nephew who has been compiling all of his work, and he's come to the West a couple times to give transmissions of them to the Nalanda Translation Committee. And so these are quite beautiful little short things. So they're really nice as meditation instructions. So I was thinking, I'm going to read one of them, and then maybe we could just sit in meditation for about 7 minutes, and then I'll go on and give the shamatha instruction from Bokra Rinpoche. So, allow yourself to sit as comfortably as you can. I'm going to get a sip of tea. Or a big gulp of tea. And so get as comfortable as you can. And as you hear, the sound of, from these instructions, just allow yourself to have whatever experience you will. And just we'll proceed from there directly into about 6 minutes, 7 minutes of practice. And this is called My Dear Good Friend. My dear good friend, the view of cutting through to primordial purity is the expanse of uncreated relaxation. Do not change, accept, or reject it. Confused thoughts of grasping and fixation are the root of samsara. Never indulge them. Thoughts arising from the related 6 consciousnesses are the display of the power of Dharmakaya. Do not deliberately stop them with antidotes. Since whatever arises is self-liberated, there is no Dharma that is not liberated. If even a hair's breadth of grasping occurs, that is not the awareness of the great perfection. And so allow yourself to rest freely. Do not change, accept, or reject experience in this moment. Okay, and just slowly come back to our being together. So again, even though this, song mentions the great perfection, I think this is a really good kind of refresher around Mahamudra as well. The view of cutting through to primordial purity is the expanse of uncreated relaxation. Do not change, accept, or reject it. Our mind is primordially pure. This is the ground of everything. I do not try and change it into something else. You don't even have to worry about accepting it. It's just there. Of course, definitely don't don't reject it. Confused thoughts of grasping and fixation are the root of samsara. Never indulge them. It's just resting free of both of these. So like with Tulipa's 6 nails, letting go of the past, letting go of the future, letting go of the present, letting go of the need to do anything, the need to control, and relaxing. Thoughts arising from the related 6 consciousnesses are the display of the power of Dharmakaya. Do not deliberately stop them with antidotes. This is actually a helpful thing for shamatha, which we'll be getting into. So practice is not about stopping experience. It's not about stopping mind. It's about letting the mind rest into its own quiescence, letting it settle on its own, which is there's a huge difference. There's a universe of difference between trying to, stick it in my teacup, get in their mind, put the top on it. That's not shamatha. It's really just letting it easefully, gracefully, beautifully, in a relaxed way, begin to settle. And in the beginning, of course, it feels impossible. However, the more we show up, it's almost like it's a feral cat. Like, we'll see it and it'll hiss maybe, but the more that we just show up and we're just still, the more likely it will be that it will stay. And maybe over time, we'll be able to pet it. Maybe over time it'll sit in your lap. Right? But the kind of key to the practice is being, I think much more just relaxed and easy, intuitive. Perhaps, as far as these classifications go, like it's a little bit more of a feminine practice, right? We're not trying to discipline this. We're not trying to make it do anything. We're just open to this natural space, this natural ease, etc. Since whatever arises is self-liberated, there is no dharma that is not liberated. And everything that arises is self-liberated. There's no need to place labels. There's no need to explain things away. Even if a hair's breadth of grasping occurs, this is not the awareness of the great perfection. And so we could just change out great perfection for great seal, Mahamudra. But this kind of grasping is something we want to let go of. So, let's see, we got so the body of this practice is starts off with shamatha, and so the very kind of traditional kind of presentation of this involves sitting in lotus position if you can, and if you can't, that's fine. Sit in whichever way is comfortable. You can be seated in a chair, you could be half lotus. You could be seated more like Guru Rinpoche or Milarepa. Your legs kind of apart a little bit. Your hands can either be on your knees or in meditation mudra, either one. Your back, spine erect, but not uncomfortably so. Neck down slightly, tilted slightly. Say that the teeth, you're not clenching your jaw, so your teeth are not, tight like that. The real traditional instructions say that you should have the tongue kind of on your upper palate, eyes downward a little bit. And they say, staring 8 finger widths from the tip of your nose. But I don't think Tibetans had a big pointy nose like me, so I don't know. I don't know what the modification is for that. Your shoulders spread like a vulture's wings, right? So you're kind of like your chest out. And again, doing this is as best one can. You can also do this laying down. You can do this, however. This is the way we place the body. And then with respect to placing the mind, the first thing we can do, depending, is to use a physical anchor, right? Like a physical object. So finding something in your field of visual consciousness or visual field, and very gently, like you're hanging a sweater on a hook, just place your gaze there. And allow yourself to observe. In a very open way, light, not like a laser, right? You're not like some kind of wrathful Buddha staring with a furrowed brow, just very lightly. If it helps, you can also maintain at the same time awareness of breath, inhalation, exhalation. And in some traditions, there's counting of breath. Inhalation, exhalation, 1. Inhalation, exhalation, 2. Inhalation, exhalation, 3. And this has never been something I've connected with, that particular instruction. The numbers, for some reason, maybe I'm dyslexic with numbers or something, but it causes a lot of mental activity. So you can just concentrate on your breathing. And let your mind be easy. And actually, this is right where Bokar Rinpoche would teach Tilopa's 6 nails, at the level of shamatha. Allow yourself to let go of the past. Right? Let all thoughts connected with everything that happened until this moment, just put that down. All expectation about the future. It hasn't happened yet. So why get involved? Any particular idea around right now, what this moment is or means, or the consequence of this moment? Just let that dissolve away. Don't think. So don't engage in any mental activity around what you think this is supposed to be like. Don't control. And don't put any imprint, again, of it's supposed to be like this, space, peace. And relax. Relax into the experience of mind. Mind and awareness. And if you find yourself getting distracted, it's okay. Be very gentle with yourself and very lovingly just bring yourself back to whatever anchor you're using or to your breath. And come right back to Opus 6 Nails. And then very slowly, just come back to the group. So I wanted to see if anybody has any questions or thoughts. considerations. It's a very beautiful practice, you know. And you know, they say in the beginning that it's you know, and I mean I remember this too. Like you know, it's also a really terrible practice in the beginning when we kind of see how busy our mind is, right? Like, so it's sometimes said that in the beginning, like you know, it's as if your mountain, your mind is like a river in the mountains between a gorge, and it's just this kind of like violent flow, right? And so sometimes just the movement of mental activity, the intensity of it is just kind of a little overwhelming. And I've definitely had experiences where people have started shamatha meditation and quickly stopped because they were just like, you know, this is just too much, you know. So if that happens, just to go as slow as feels comfortable, but also to remember that it gets better over time. You know, there's a change, and it's said that eventually it's kind of like, you know, a big wide river, maybe like the Hudson or, you know, the Mississippi as it moves down towards, you know, the Delta, right? And then of course then it becomes like the ocean after some time. And it's true. That does happen. You know, I find it a very relaxing, soothing practice. The same way, like Tilopa's 6 nails, you know, it is. My root teacher first introduced it to me before I met Bokar Rinpoche, and then Bokar Rinpoche introduced it when he introduced shamatha. But even as a like advanced, you know, Mahamudra Hatha Yoga instruction, it is super salient as well. Right? When we start to look at what it means to experience mind beyond time, you know, the 3 times, past, present, future, you know, in kind of, sorry, this is a little harsh, but like, you know, cheap modern meditation parlance of just like, you know, be in the present, man, like be present, right? There's a little cheap, right? Because we're really talking about this mind that extends vastly in every direction, all the way to the past, all the way through the future, you know, including of course this time. And it's worth kind of remembering too that you know, when we talk about or begin to think about alaya consciousness, right? So alaya consciousness is, you know, in some classifications described as this very subtle ground consciousness that almost records and is aware of every single thing that has ever happened, every memory, every experience, every sense through time, right? So if there's alaya consciousness, right, then why are we only focusing on, you know, now, you know, in our meditation instruction? Like, can't we just let the mind, if the consciousness itself, alaya consciousness, is that expansive, then obviously the nature of mind is this way as well too, right? So you know, I have some really, like, you know, I like to call them like heart love connections with some people from long time ago. And every so often in meditation, like I can have a very clear experience of them, like even the Mahasiddha Maitreya, you know, or others, right? So this kind of remembrance of the fact that, you know, we will sometimes think of ourselves as very limited. Oh, you know, I'm learning meditation because I'm suffering so much and I live here now in 2022. But really remembering that, like, our consciousness, it's not just us who are tulku, like all beings are kind of tulkus in this way. This extension of mind, you know, goes all the way back, all the way back, all the way back, all the way back, all the way forward, all the way forward, all the way forward, right? And so shamatha for me is like a nice way of kind of sitting in a cool pond past the 3 times. Excuse me, or you know, including the 3 times, not just right now. and letting ourselves just settle into this much more vast experience than the smallness of this particular iteration, just in 99,000.0, or 0.1, or whatever life this is. So I don't know. What are your experiences?
I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
So for shamatha, sorry, my voice, I've been quite sick, so coming off it, but my voice will be all weird. So I've heard in shamatha, the instruction has been to focus on a little bit more on the exhales. And somehow for me, I just am not able to focus on the exhale. I can do both, but somehow my inhales, my attention is more, and the impact is the same. Like I do experience that tranquility, openness, do experience, the stillness of the mind. And then the body falls because the body is so relaxed. The mind is no longer encompassed in the, all of that, everything is okay. But is there a reason why people ask to focus on the exhale, or like what's that about? In general, this is one of my core practices. It works for me. But just wanted to see if you have any perspective on that.
Yeah, this is a good question. Thank you. I don't know. I've actually, excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. I've never heard, excuse me, specifically. I mean, I've heard people saying it. I've never, like in my kind of Tibetan context, like heard the focusing on the exhale thing. I think what's important is these kinds of instructions, and actually Ninth Karmapa says this in pointing out the Dharmakaya, and we're going to go through all these different things you can focus on, over the coming weeks. It's not that you have to master each one, right? And it's not even that you have to have facility with two. You just have to know really what works for you, which one, and go with that, right? And so there is also space to kind of personalize these things. So, if I will never, so don't worry, Ekta, I will never say focus on the exhale, because that's just not my thing. And I've actually never seen that. That would be a little snob, and like put my nose up. And then, again, like, to be totally honest, like my favorite way of anchoring the mind is just to use mind itself. Right, so whatever is arising in the moment. It might be a little abstract, right? But it's this kind of like essential or essenceless shamatha, right? Of just letting ourselves just use that. For some people, focus on breath very specifically is not helpful at all, and it can lead to the sense of constriction. It can lead to a sense of panic, and for some people, it also kind of reifies this individual self, thing that, we're trying to kind of like, ice skate away from. So, I think what's most important is to first, use the thing that allows us to kind of settle. And then, perhaps if we can, gradually shift towards just using mind itself, experience itself as the anchor. Yeah, and whatever happens, like whatever instruction isn't working, don't go to a place of judging, because that's not helpful. So yeah, Melissa, your hand is up.
Real quickly, I was taught on the out breath by Krupa Rinpoche. That's comfortable for me. I think people forget there's a million breathing techniques. So some people get locked in and it's not helpful. I just wanted to mention that as a trauma victim, when I first was doing a lot of shamatha, it was difficult. And a friend of mine who had PTSD was told by a meditation instructor, do short sessions. So I wondered if you have advice for people who are trauma victims, how to approach shamatha.
Yeah, no, totally. Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I've found, and when I say this, I'm not equating trauma, the experience of trauma with mental illness, but in my chaplaincy training, half of which was spent on psych floors, I used to run these meditation sessions there, and I found that it was almost, it was very, very consistent that there would always be, basically learned quickly that you couldn't use breath, related meditation, and even have to be very careful with like body, sensation as a something to focus on, because physical traumas get activated or triggered, or I found that people who sometimes suffer from bipolar disorder, especially if they're manic, once they loop into this kind of awareness of breath, just causes mental activity to speed up. So yeah, like this is a good example of maybe understanding that, like, the perhaps the location around which some of these instructions originally arose are not necessarily always universally applicable, and so demonstrating some skill in getting comfortable with experimenting to see what works is very helpful. Ninth Karmapa and Boku Rinpoche and a lot of teachers that I've had have always stressed short meditation sessions, and this is actually also true in for the Dzogchen or Hatha Yoga tradition, and this is because let's put it this way: there's this fundamental fallacy that we need to beat ourselves into submission with these long sessions, and that's the thing that causes the transformation of experience into an experience of freshness and directness and fundamental spaciousness. In fact, since that is our base, right, since that is the true nature of mind, touching back into this as much as we can during the day in short sessions is much more helpful, right? And so this could be anything from, 12 minutes, 15 minutes, but all the way down to, 5 minutes, right? Multiple times a day. And so this is something, because I tend to meet with sometimes as much as anywhere between 8 and 10 students a day. And sometimes I'll have these little 5-minute blocks. It's a really lovely, exercise to just drop right into the experience of mind and touch into that fundamental freshness. And what we'll find is that there is this kind of source of resilience, of energy, of clarity, of release, of ease. And then also joy in the sense of, touching into an experience of mind which is spacious, vast, and our own natural experience. And so I would, be concerned actually if somebody came to me for meditation instruction and they're like, yeah, I'm going to do a home retreat and I'm going to practice for like 2 hours straight in each session. I would actually say, you know what, why don't you try 12 minutes and be like a cat, get up and stretch, walk around, or like a dog, I guess, like walk around your meditation cushion and sit back down and do it again, and then get back up and do it again and get back up and do it again, because it's about touching directly into this experience, touching directly, touching, and not pushing ourselves into a situation where we feel like we're struggling and wrestling. you know. And yeah, you know, I mean, like the science behind trauma and the science behind you know, the treatment of mental illness and all of these things wasn't, you know, so like 12th, 11th century Tibetan, 12th century Tibetan meditation manuals, I wouldn't expect them to address that, you know, those concerns. So I would say, you know, we need to kind of look at, you know, what kind of hybrid points of connection there can be between these various kinds of systems. You know, the same way I wouldn't say like, oh, you know, if you're sick, rather than get surgery or go to the doctor, just pray. You know, like there could have been a time where that was, you know, the preferred, you know, approach. But you know, make use of all of the skills and all of the modalities, you know, in one's toolkit to be able to, you know, kind of work to the edge of healing with every kind of system, you know. So orthodoxy is pretty, should be regarded with suspicion. It's not to say I love orthodoxy and I have my orthodoxies, but I actually keep those private, you know. It's like, that's just for me, you know. You know. So, yeah. Yeah. Good. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. And I apologize that, you know, we have to cut this a little short, but next week we'll be able to go the regular length. And we'll keep going with shamatha next week, and some songs. And yeah, take good care of yourselves. And if anybody needs anything, please feel free to reach out. You know, any questions or anything, it's totally fine. That's what I'm here for. So yeah, take very good care of yourselves. Be well and be good. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.